Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning everyone and welcome to today's session. Today we look at this epic poem written in Portuguese language titled the Lusiads. So to give you a context and relevance of this discussion, let me draw your attention to a newspaper report which appeared in 2009 in a leading national daily. It was titled Portuguese Epic Speaks of Kerala's Past. And I read you an excerpt from this news report. 74 years after Vasco da Gama's fleet weighed anchor at Kapar in Kozhikode on May 20, 1498, a book that told the story of his voyage via southern Africa to India was printed in Portugal. So this is the relevance of us discussing this Portuguese epic today, and we will also see how this is connected to our own history and how this showcases the continuing interconnections and the interweaving of literatures and cultures as we have been trying to contextualize them for this course on world literature. And this a piece of news, it also adds the epic poem will be of great interest to Malayalis. Its descriptive passages tell us of the palace of the Zamburan. The poem has been translated into Konkani. It is yet to be translated into Malayalam. So the news is about a series of lectures which are in the context, which are highlighting the historical and literary importance of this epic titled the Lusiads. So setting this context for you, I move on to take you through a brief journey introducing this epic and its author and its historical relevance for you. This historical epic, the Lusiads, was written by Camoes, and this is how this name is pronounced, Camoes. He lived from 1524 till 1580, soon after the expedition, the successful voyage and expedition of Vasco da Gama. Camoes is considered as a founder and exemplar of Portuguese literature. He is analogous to Shakespeare for English literature or Dante for Italian literature. And it's said that he is the first major European writer to travel physically south of equator. He was a soldier, a prisoner, a shipwreck survivor. Whatever he wrote about were based on his first-hand experiences, his voyages. And one of the recent studies on Camoes and his epic, the Lusiads, by Klein in 2013, it notes, he was an active seafarer, not an armchair geographer writing from the safety of his study in Lisbon. He served as a soldier in Cuba in northern Africa in 1540s, and from the mid 1550s spent at least 7 years in the east, travelling quite possibly as far as Macau in eastern China. And Nicholas Burns opines about him that he is not merely a Portuguese national poet, he is a poet of the global Lusophone world, which includes Brazil, Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde and East Timor. So this is the relevance and historical significance of this poet Camoes and his epic work, the Lusiads. Camoes is not a poet who found fame only in recent times. Even during his own times and the centuries that followed thereafter, there's enough evidence to believe that he was quite popular and he was a well-acknowledged writer. In an anonymous memoir from the 17th century, it's recorded about Camoes that famous poet Lucy D. Camoes, who speaking in absolutes was a prince of them all, was a tall man with broad shoulders and reddish hair. His face was freckled and he was blind in one eye. He was a man of sharp mind, clear judgment and rare wit. He was well read in the humanities, well versed in the sciences, skilled at arms and valiant of spirit. So this is how Camoes is introduced in an anonymous 17th century memoir. And what we find in the Lusiads, the details and the graphic descriptions that we find in the Lusiads they do stand testimony to the many things which have been written about Camoes. What is the main theme and the central crux of this epic, the Lusiads? It's about Vasco da Gama's voyage and the discovery of a new sea route. And if you ask what the significance of this voyage is, da Gama's voyage, it's described as a defining moment of the beginning of modernity. It said that it shrank the globe, whereafter yoking Asia inseparably with Western Europe. It pulled commerce out of the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic Ocean. So that's the significance of this voyage, and by extension, this epic, the Lusiads, it also acquires this status and relevance of situating itself within this moment of the beginning of modernity. And when we look back at that epic today, after centuries, we begin to see how important that document is for us to understand the kind of initiatives taken, the kind of enterprising spirit that Vasco da Gama and his crew had back in the 15th century. And this is what this iconic travel did to modernity. This is roughly the route that Vasco da Gama and his crew took from Portugal till Calicut. And this discovery, as we know our history, it was a momentous episode which totally rewrote the story of colonialism and the story of international trade. Bearing this in mind, we begin to talk about the various ways in which the Lusiads talk about this epic voyage. This epic voyage, undertaken by Vasco da Gama and his crew in the 15th century, it was a dangerous exploit to begin with, and it said that only a third of the crew survived after this entire expedition. And there's every reason to believe the accounts which are given in the Lusiads, because our author, Camoes himself, he had also undertaken this same journey. He was sent on an exile 50 years later, 50 years after Vasco da Gama's momentous journey, and he could come back only after 20 years. He was shipwrecked during this time. He made a lost fortune, and eventually, as a sum of this, as a sum total of this experience, he produced this poem which was as epic as his journey. The Lusiads is an epic poem which Camoes started writing in the mid 1560s, and it was published in 1572. There are many English translations available today, at least 8 of them. And the first translation was by Sir Richard Fanshawe. He was a courtier of Charles I, King Charles I, and this translation appeared in 1655. And this translation of the Lusiads from Portuguese to English, it's seen as the first major literary exchange between Portugal and England. And now in different languages, we have more than 100 editions of this poem, the Lusiads. It has been translated more than 50 times into different languages, including Latin, Italian, Dutch, French, Polish, and various other languages. And these translations began to appear from the 17th and 18th centuries onwards. And of late, we also find a lot of critical attention and historical attention being bestowed upon this epic. The Lusiads is considered as the national epic of Portugal, and it was written when Camoes was an exile in Macau. And this, if you try to sum up the story of the Lusiads, the plot, the central theme of Lusiads, it is a story of the Portuguese exploration of Africa and the Indian Ocean, and it is narrated in the form of a traditional epic. And it's also one of the most modern, recent epics available to us in terms of its dimension, in terms of its scope, and in terms of the large canvas that it deals with. It chronicles Vasco da Gama's voyage around Africa to India and discovery of this new sea route. This was between 1479 and 1499. And Camoes, incidentally, had also spent far more time than Vasco da Gama himself did and Camoes himself had spent far more time in Asia than in Africa. So his accounts also have that graphic quality when he talks about his experiences in Asia. And the Lusiads is about real people who lived in the recent past. And this is unlike other Renaissance epics, which relied a lot on fantasy, which relied on reliving myths, folk tales and legends. And here we have a closer to life account because it's also loosely based on Camoes experiences. And it's also one of the earliest modern epics to depict non-European people, especially when we talk about the kind of works which were produced from a predominantly European setting. The title, the Lusiads, it derives from the term Lusitania. It was a Roman name used for a province that now roughly encompasses the present day Portugal. It's written in a Homeric fashion, and this was written 3 years after the authors returned from the Indies. There are a lot of descriptive passages which tell us about the location of the Zamorin, and we also get to know a lot about the details through the lens of this author, Camoes. Its setting, the canvas, is really expansive. It's set in Portugal, Africa and India, and of course at sea. And the protagonist of this epic, the hero of this epic, is not Vasco da Gama but Portugal. But Portugal as a nation, Portugal as a nation which had the enterprising ability and the spirit to send out people on voyage. So this term is also very befitting to this national epic, which now is considered almost a source of supreme national pride. The structure of the poem befits an epic. There are 10 cantos written in ottava rima. There are 8,816 lines of verse and 1,102 stanzas. It's divided into 4 sections. There's an introduction, an invocation, a dedication, followed by narration or action, followed by the actual epic. And this is dedicated to King Sebastian, who is also a patron of arts and literature of those times. At the outset of the epic, in the beginning, it begins in the epic tradition. We are told right at the outset that the intention is to celebrate the heroes of Portugal together with its navigation and discovery. So Vasco da Gama's heroism is also situated within this national narrative, and it also concludes with an epilogue in a typical epic fashion. Reading the Lusiads is more like an experience. Nevertheless, I try to summarize some of the key points which are part of the Lusiads. When the epic begins, we get to know that Vasco da Gama's ships are underway in the Indian Ocean. They are sailing up the coast of East Africa, and there is also a rather extraordinary setting of Greek gods. The gods meet together. There's a council, and these gods of Greco-Roman mythology, they gather to discuss the fate of the expedition. So they have these different opinions about the future, the outcome of this expedition that is led by Vasco da Gama. And there's also a competition going on between these Greco-Roman gods to promote or foil the expedition. And we are introduced to Vasco da Gama and his crew in Canto 1 when they are midway of the ocean. And they are just off the East African coast, just south of Mozambique. So it does not begin at the beginning when they set out on sail from Portugal, but it begins in the middle of narration in media re, midway of the ocean. The opening is also aboard a ship, and this is a conscious allusion to Virgil's Aeneid, which the epic which on and off we find Camoes also tends to imitate and even emulate. And the opening lines go like this: arms are my theme and those matchless heroes. So it pretty much sums up the central theme of this epic, that it's about the matchless heroes of Portugal, and the theme revolves around arms, which includes not just the physical arms, not just the physical tools and weapons that they have, but it also includes the courage, spirit and the enterprising initiatives that this Portuguese crew possesses. I try to give you an outline based on each of the cantos. In Canto 1, we are introduced to this proposition to ride da Gama's voyage. It's part of the dedication as well, and there is an invocation followed by the narrative which begins in the middle of narration. Canto 2 features a conflict between the gods, especially between Venus and Bacchus, and it's also the time when da Gama's crew arrives in Africa. In Canto 3, Vasco da Gama himself is made to narrate the history of Portugal to the king of Melinde, and this is after arriving in Africa. And if you look at the map of the voyage which was shown earlier, the beginning of the narration, it happens somewhere around here. And in Canto 4, we find that the recitation of the Portuguese history continues. In Canto 5 is more like a flashback. We're taken back to Lisbon, where he is about to set out on this epic journey. We are giving details of Vasco da Gama's departure, the details of his voyage. And Canto 5 also has this interesting discussion where Camoes is lamenting the death of worthy poets in the world. In Canto 6, there's a storm at sea. We find Vasco da Gama praying to the gods and he's delivered by Venus. Throughout this narration, we find that the Greco-Roman gods, they have a significant role to play here, and this weaving in of mythical elements into this otherwise historical story is something which has interested the critics always. In Canto 7, we find Vasco da Gama arriving at Calicut. He's introduced to Indian customs and culture. He's also meeting the Zamorin, who is not easy to please. And in Canto 8, there's again a recounting of Portuguese heroes. Remember, this was written primarily to extol the spirit of Portuguese adventure. So, the hero of this epic is Portugal itself. So, every now and then, whenever an opportunity presents itself, we find Camoes resorting to various means of recounting and retelling Portuguese history, glorifying its achievements. In Canto 9, we find this episode where Isle of Love is given to Portuguese, and the final canto, Canto 10, is a celebration banquet. It also exalts King Sebastian to do great things. It is said that the monarchs in Portugal, they were extremely supportive of these expeditions and voyages, and they also had encouraged Portuguese literature, their presentation of Portuguese history, Portuguese art in multiple ways. We find Camoes focusing on the thrill and adventure of this journey. In this narration, from Canto 1 till Canto 10, in spite of the many details which are woven in, the thrill and adventure of the voyage is not missed out at all. In terms of a storyline, this is about Vasco da Gama's story of sailing from point A, which is Lisbon, to point B, which is India. But the charm, the thrill and adventure, it lies in the fact that Vasco da Gama does not know where point B is until he sets sail. He reaches there by a happy accident and also by a lot of planning and adventurous spirit. But there is no sense of where the point B is until he sets sail and until he reaches there. There is no locus of control in this real historical event, which is why when it is being made into an epic form, Jupiter and Venus are introduced. These god figures are introduced as figures who would control, who would look after the heroes. They would also operate as these central locus of control. So, things do not appear out of control or things do not appear uncertain to the reader. Within this dominant theme of Portuguese navigation and Portuguese exploration and the celebration of Portuguese heroes, namely Vasco da Gama, we find multiple minor themes which also try to extol this theme of Portuguese spirit. One of them is the celebration of Portuguese destiny to conquer primitive cultures and spread their modern, Western and Christian values. We find a number of episodes where these kinds of aims and purposes do come out. The sea is also seen as a poetic, historical and social space at the same time. It's not something, the sea is not a space, a site which is introduced into this epic because it is fascinating by itself. In the context of, in the real historical context of this epic and this voyage, we find that the sea operates as a historical and social space. There are stories of the nation and stories of colonialism and stories of trade which get written and rewritten by way of the sea route, and it also operates as a social space, as we would see from the details given in the epic and also from the many historical details that we can gather. And some of the critics have spoken about the poet Camoes' historico-imaginative engagement with the ocean, and this is very significant because this is in the form of an epic. It is relatively modern. It engages with the sea, which was always a site of fascination for poets and writers, but it is also situated within this historical space of modernity. George Montero therefore rightfully comments that this is the first modern epic which extolled discovery, religious conversion, trade and empire. We do have the figures of gods and certain supernatural elements happening in the context of this epic. But we cannot come across another modern epic which brings together the narrative of modernity within this narrative form. Within these larger themes of modernity and Portuguese nationalism, we do find certain minor episodes which also need to be attended to. In Canto 7, we are introduced to a Muslim from Morocco. His name is Monsaid. He tells Vasco da Gama about the history, religion and socio-political systems of India. Throughout this narration, we get introduced to different nationalities, different cultures. So it's more or less like a tour of Europe, Africa, the Middle East, India, China, Japan and various islands of the Pacific and Indian Ocean. As mentioned earlier, the expanse and scope of this epic in that sense is amazing. In Canto 5, we find Vasco da Gama insisting that his voyage is greater than those of Ulysses and Aeneas. And this is also a way in which Camoes is indirectly trying to tell us that his epic, the Lusiads, it's going to be greater than these ancient classic epics. We find the use of classical gods and goddesses, but the theme is not entirely pagan. So we find a fusion of the Christian and pagan myths, which is also again another way in which this epic fits itself within this narrative of modernity. In Canto 9, we also find this predominant Christian outlook of Camoes getting highlighted, though he uses the gods and goddesses for the purpose of this epic, for the narrative purpose, for the plot purpose. We find him dismissing these pagan gods as poetic constructions. This happens in Canto 9. There is this verse, Jupiter, Mercury, Phoebus, they were all composed of feeble human clay. He is conscious of the fact that these are creations by humans and he is using them as a poetic device, and that Camoes finds it necessary to articulate this, necessary to underscore this and highlight it. It also speaks volumes about the kind of value system and the kind of belief system within which he himself is situated. In Canto 10, we have another verse, I, Saturn and Janus, Jupiter and Juno are mere fables, dreamed by mankind in his blindness. We serve only to fashion delightful verses. He is introducing gods and goddesses and the ancient classical myths in the context of the epic, but he is also telling the reader that these are poetic devices and from the beginning they have only the status of fables. They are dreamed by mankind in blindness, and this is in stark contrast with the light that Christianity is supposedly bringing in. And we do find Christian values being highlighted vis-a-vis the pagan belief systems. And as mentioned earlier, this is also seen as one of the ways in which Portugal as a nation, they reach out to the rest of the world in terms of sharing their belief system and their value system. Some critics have noticed that it is hard to find the hostility towards Muslims which is evident in this epic. The Muslim characters are presented as villains, they are labelled as Moors, and it's even the principal theme of Canto 3. There's only one Muslim character which is presented in a favourable light, that is Monsaid. He's the one who's introducing the Indian custom and cultures to Vasco da Gama. But there's a flip side to this positive portrayal of Monsaid. He is someone who turns Christian after helping Vasco da Gama escape from Calicut. So one does not know whether this presentation of Monsaid in a favourable light is because of his impending conversion to Christianity. As we wrap up this discussion, it's important to note that we can possibly read the Lusiads as a humanist epic, which is what makes it enduring to us even after centuries of its original writing and publication. And this has been seen as humanist for specific reasons, because this is an epic which infuses Vasco da Gama's voyage with a mythological significance, and it also befits that supreme event which rewrote the story of modernity. And looking at it from a literary perspective, we find that it's also exemplary of the new European literary movements which were in place during the time when Camoes was writing. As we wind up, I leave you with this excerpt from one of the critical commentaries. He is a humanist even in his contradictions, in his association of a pagan mythology with a Christian outlook, in his conflicting feelings about war and empire, in his love of home and his desire for adventure, in his appreciation of pleasure. The Lusiads thus clearly qualifies as a modern epic which has the traits of humanism, and it also has the capacity to please. I hope this lecture has been an encouragement for you to go and look up at least some excerpts of this epic work titled The Lusiads. That's all we have for today. I thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next session.